Hey everyone, it's the Koopa Man. We've talked about media tropes a number of times, so much so it's my main go-to for video topics alongside Pokemon, culture warrior bashing, and Snoopy. But one trope that goes really unnoticed and underappreciated is that of the flat character, the two-dimensional characters who never learn or grow. And believe it or not, they do have a purpose in stories, games, movies, and the like. Most people would call flat characters lazy writing, but that's not always the case. Like any trope, it's all in how the execution is handled. So, what is a flat character, you may ask? Flat characters are always how they are from when you first meet them. They don't change all that much, and sometimes it can be a good thing if they serve a story purpose. Take for example, Old Joe and his patrons in the timeless classic, A Christmas Carol. In that story, they serve no purpose other than to be pickers of a freshly deceased man's belongings to sell for their own benefits. Their only purpose is to show Scrooge that in his death, this is the only substance he brings to the world. We don't know their names, who they are as people, or what their motivations are for picking the belongings of a dead man. All we know is that they did what they did, and because Scrooge is a witness, it's motivation for him to change. So he doesn't become like the man whose body lay cold and alone on the bed, and whose grave goes unmourned and unnoticed, the only pallbearers in attendance only there for a free meal. But because these characters were in the story where they are tools for the main character, Scrooge, to have the dynamic change he needed to complete his character arc. Like all tropes, flat characters are story and narrative tools. They do serve a purpose, it's all in how they're utilized. In fact, flat characters aren't exclusively just side characters to further the main character's arcs. Sometimes, they actually are the main character. Sounds crazy? Well, how about I hit you with one of the foremost examples I can think of, Son Goku from Dragon Ball. Through the story of Dragon Ball, while the world and stakes do change as the series goes on, and while he does age from a child into a man, Goku remains largely the same as when Bulma first met him, a barely civilized hick whose passions are fighting, training, and living off the land. And this never changes. Sure, he gains new forms, new techniques, and the ability to read, write, and do arithmetic, but at the end of the day, he's still who he was in the first chapter, and would still probably offer Bulma a dead coyote and a ground noodle for dinner. Now, some would say that Goku grows a bit more complex with a hero complex in Z, only to revert back in Super, but to those who do say that, I would like to remind everyone that Dragon Ball fans can't read. In the manga, he's pretty consistent, and his only real character arc, so to speak, aside from Punch the Bad Guy, is learning that his son doesn't like fighting as much as he does, and that's okay. In addition to Goku, Superman is another prime example of a flat character. Sure, there are storylines that add depth to his background, but Kal-El remains unchanged. The boy from Kansas, the last son of Krypton, forever fighting for truth, justice, and the American way. In fact, there's an entire storyline whose thesis is that Superman's flat character serves a real purpose and is still compelling, funnily enough, called What's So Funny About Truth, Justice, and the American Way.
My heroes are still innocent. My heroes didn't fucking lie to America. My heroes didn't fucking commit any atrocities. I'm like, that's cool, but you're living in a fucking dream world.
Good. Dreams save us. Dreams lift us up and transform us into something better. And on my soul, I swear that until my dream of a world where dignity, honor, and justice are the reality we all share, I'll never stop fighting. Ever.
Yeah, it always comes back to that guy, doesn't it? What Snyder and other writers and directors don't get is that people love Superman because of who he is and what he represents. He doesn't develop because he doesn't need to. It's the case for Batman as well, and Wolverine, and actually a number of comic book heroes. Granted, it's not always the case. Dick Grayson and the Teen Titans had to grow and develop character arcs as their stories went over the struggles from adolescence to adulthood, but by and large, superheroes remain pillars of what they represent. Truth, vengeance, mercy, hope, all that sort of stuff. Comic strips tend to have flat characters as well. Even after all these years, Garfield still hates Mondays, Charlie Brown still hasn't kicked a football, and Doonesbury hasn't convinced me that its author isn't a blithering retard. Moving from the world of comics to the world of TV sitcoms, one great example is the cast of the 90s classic Seinfeld. The entire point of the show, at least how Larry David puts it, is that it's about 4 people who were just bad people going through mundane situations and learning nothing through the course of the show. But the 2 who stand out the most in this aspect are Jerry Seinfeld himself and his neighbor, Cosmo Kramer. Jerry is just that. Jerry. He's pretty chill, kind of a man-child, doesn't really care about anything, and everything just sort of evens out for him.
Elaine, don't get too down. Everything will even out. See, I have 2 friends. You were up, he was down. Now he's up, you're down. You see how it all evens out for me?
Through the entire series, he doesn't change who he is. He's still the same chill, petty man-child nitpicking everything. The same can be said for Kramer, who's constantly bursting into Jerry's apartment and mooching food off of him. Not much changes. Any scheme he gets up to is usually bust by the end of the episode, and he never suffers from any long-term consequences. And that plays to the humor of the kind of show that Seinfeld is. It's all a show of just how petty these people can be and how they get through seemingly beyond mundane day-to-day situations with just how petty and kind of immature they are. It's about the situation, not the story. This is why when the other New York sitcom, Friends, had a spin-off featuring their flat character, Joey, it sort of didn't work. Friends wasn't the same type of comedy that Seinfeld was. Sure, it was still about horrible people, but they also had to focus on character arcs and development and the will they won't they bullshit. All except for Phoebe and Joey. And because Joey was the star of, well, Joey, the show sort of died in its first season because nobody watched Friends to see Joey as the main guy.
Oh, very well. This is a Joey-heavy episode anyway.
A supporting player, yes, but not as the main guy. Like all tropes, flat characters only work if the writer knows how to use them. Everything is context dependent after all. One could argue that Biff Tannen and his relatives from Back to the Future are flat villains that are just evil jerks for the sake of it, and that'd be correct. But that's okay, because that's their role in the story. They're the evil jerk antagonists to Marty, Doc, and George, and that's all that's required of them. They don't need to grow and evolve, as that's not the story that's being told. There are other uses for flat characters as well, beyond just being static in a story. Sometimes having a flat character allows someone to insert themselves into the character. A number of role-playing games do this, particularly Pokemon. The character of the Pokemon trainer you inhabit is predictably flat as to allow the player to immerse themselves into the world of Pokemon. All we know about Red is that he's named after a color, comes from Pallet Town, beat up Team Rocket, and became Kanto champion. That, and he has a team of Kanto starters and Pikachu. Though he hardly ever says anything, you rarely see him when you're not playing as him, and for some reason in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, he only has Venusaur on his team, and has a Machamp for some reason, despite never using one on any of his teams before. Or the fact that he uses the Johto starters in Pokemon Stadium 2, not the Kanto ones, as well as Jolteon, Scizor, and Tauros. Or in round 2, the legendary Beast and Dragonite. The only ones consistent when his in-main game team are Snorlax and Espeon. This flatness and existence to promote player immersion might be why in Super Smash Bros. Brawl and Ultimate, the character is called Pokemon Trainer rather than Red or Leaf for the alt-skin female trainer. And it's not just the various Pokemon trainers who are built like this, as the same argument can be made for the various Fallout protagonists as well. Fallout 2 is an RPG series designed to allow you to immerse yourself and make your own choices. In fact, New Vegas and Fallout 4 even let you side with the villains like Caesar's Legion, the Institute, the Railroad, and the NCR. To say that a flat character is an example of bad writing is seriously missing the point of what the trope is for. Tropes are tools, and whether they are good or bad is all in how the writer uses them. Flat characters can be icons for grander ideals like Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. They can be avatars for player immersion like the Pokemon trainers or the Fallout Wanderers. They can be vehicles for comedy like Kramer or Bugs Bunny, or they can be plot elements like Old Joe or Biff Tannen, or even the hero of the story like Goku or James Bond. None of this, of course, is excusing the times when flat characters are misused in a story. Nobody here is ever going to forgive Joey, but there are other examples. Captain Phasma from the Star Wars sequels comes to mind immediately. They gave a cool design to a character who ultimately ends up being a shallow Vader XP without much of the depth or charisma. There was also Onslaught, the villain from the X-Men who was a fusion of Professor Xavier and Magneto, who somehow ends up being lesser than the sum of his two halves. Onslaught's only purpose in the story he was introduced in was to be an unstoppable force out to destroy everything, and the only reason he's still remembered today is because he happened to be the final boss of the first Marvel vs. Capcom. And don't get me started on Z Broly, aka everything wrong with the Dragon Ball fandom embodied as a character. It's even worse that he had very little character to begin with, other than power level Gobert, but when they used him again 2 movies later, he somehow was even more two-dimensional, just being a screaming power level machine. You gotta fuck up pretty bad when the idea of Bio Broly is more interesting than the original. Again, that isn't to say Broly being flat is bad, so are Frieza, Cell, Boo, most of the villains actually. But the problem is they left a lot on the table that went underdeveloped to keep Broly as a flat angry heel, which fortunately was used to develop Super Broly in the reboot into an actual well-rounded character instead. Basically, the problem with Z Broly is they attempted to make a fleshed out movie villain, failed at it, but the audience fell in love with everything that made Broly flat and two-dimensional, so they only used those aspects when they made Broly the Second Coming, and when they used him in spin-off media like the video games. The thing connecting all of these characters, though, is they're flat by happenstance, not by design. Their two-dimensional aspects were entirely the result of an accident due to bad planning or poor writing. In the promotional tie-in material for The Force Awakens, Captain Phasma was supposed to be a much deeper and much more interesting character than she ended up being, or at least that's what was implied by the promotional tie-ins. Onslaught was entirely the result of editorial mandates dictating how the storyline should go so Marvel could publish it as a major event on the level of the death, reign, and return of Superman. It was the 90s after all, and both Marvel and DC were their own worst enemy in this regard. Too many cooks in the kitchen between 2 writers and a handful of editors made the character a generic mess. And even Joey Tribbiani, who was designed to be a flat character, his role in his own spin-off show was mishandled due to the expectations involved of the kind of show that Friends was, and how Joey couldn't work on his own. Friends doesn't work with just one friend. And that's the thing at the end of the day. Flat characters, in order to be good, need to have a purpose. They need to have balance, and they need to be intentional. Without those things, it just falls apart into a mess. Red and the Courier worked because they were designed to be vessels for you to inhabit with your own choices, but Phasma didn't work because she ended up being a vessel for one of the writers or actresses. Ditto for Rey, by the way. And flat comic book heroes usually have villains and ensemble casts to round out their story, as do sitcom casts. Nobody wants to see a Kramer solo show.
I hear this guy's hilarious. He played Kramer, you know.
Oh, this is gonna be fun!
It's all gotta have purpose, because flat characters, like any trope, are just parts of a greater whole. And a story, like a chain, is only as strong as its weakest link. You can have strong flat characters, sure, but if you fail at making a dynamic character and it comes off as a flat character, or if you have a flat character with no purpose to be there, then it brings the whole story down, and you should avoid that whenever possible. Anyway, that's about all. I think we've covered what I want to talk about. This has been the Koopa Man. If you like this video, leave a like and subscribe as it helps my channel grow. Feel free to discuss flat characters in the comments section, be they good ones or bad ones, as I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about this. And until next time, game on.